I can't see you though. It only says M.
Okay.
Hello, Minakshi.
Yeah. How are you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Bolun.
Okay, so we have our principals here with us.
মানে
Yes.
নেটের খুব গোলমাল বারবার।
আচ্ছা স্যার গুড মর্নিং স্যার।
Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir.
হ্যাঁ ম্যাডামকে গুড মর্নিং জানাচ্ছি আমাদের
Good morning.
খুব ভালো লাগছে যে আপনি আমাদের আজকে সঙ্গ দিচ্ছেন আমার ছাত্রছাত্রীদের আপনাদের মতো স্কলারদের কাছ থেকে তারা কিছু শিক্ষা পাবে এটা আমরা আশা করছি এবং খুব ভালো লাগছে ম্যাডাম আপনি ভালো থাকুন এই মহামারীতে ছাত্রছাত্রীদের পঠন পাঠন বন্ধ রয়েছে সেই আপনাদের মতো স্কলারদের পণ্ডিতদের সান্নিধ্যে আমাদের স্টুডেন্টরা পাচ্ছে এটা আমাদের কাছে খুব গর্বের বিষয় কারণ আমাদের কলেজ একদম গ্রামীণ কলেজ আপনার ছাত্রী আছে মীনাক্ষী আছে খুব ভালো লাগছে ম্যাডাম
থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ থ্যাংক ইউ আমাকে আপনার সঙ্গে পরিচয় হয়েও ভালো লাগছে আর মীনাক্ষী তো আমার ছাত্রী
হ্যাঁ ম্যাডাম
ভীষণই ভালো লাগছে থ্যাংক ইউ ফর দিস অপরচুনিটি
হ্যাঁ খুব ভালো লাগছে ম্যাডাম
আপনারা খুব ভালো কাজ করছেন এই যে সিরিজ অফ লেকচারস ইনভাইটেড লেকচারস করছেন স্টুডেন্টদের
সবই তো আমার যারা সহকর্মী রয়েছে তারা করছেন আমি তাদেরকে একটু উৎসাহ দিই শুধুমাত্র আর কি
খুব ভালো করছেন
আমি আগে থেকে যাচ্ছি আমাদের কলেজে আপনি আসবেন আমরা খুব খুশি হব
অবশ্যই
আমাদের কলেজে আসবেন ম্যাডাম খুব ভালো লাগছে মীনাক্ষী আছে আমাদের বিধান আছে আমাদের আরো যারা সহকর্মী রয়েছেন ইংরেজির তাদের মাধ্যমে আপনি আসুন এবং এসে আমাদের একজন সশরীরে একটা সেমিনার করুন খুব ভালো লাগবে আমাদের কারণ এর মাধ্যমে কারণ আমরা তো শিক্ষক তো আমরা ছেলেদের আই কন্ট্যাক্ট হলে পরে আমরা ঠিক মনে হয় না যে ঠিক মতো ছেলেটা বুঝতে পারছে কি বুঝতে পারছে না সেই আর কি আপনি আসবেন আপনাকে অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ আপনি আপনার অনেক সময় নষ্ট করে আমাদের সঙ্গে ছাত্রছাত্রীদের কাছে আসছেন এটা আমাদের কাছে খুব গর্বের বিষয় খুব ভালো লাগে ম্যাডাম আজকে আমাদের এখানেতে নেটের খুব প্রবলেম রয়েছে
আচ্ছা
বার কেটে যাচ্ছে নেট ঠিক আছে নমস্কার নেবেন
থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ ফর দিস ওয়েলকাম
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Dhonnobad, sir. Bidhanda, tumi acho? Are you there?
Yes, Meenakshi,
we shall just wait for a few minutes and then we will begin our session today. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes, you are.
Yes, ma'am. We'll just begin. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
Will the session be recorded and kept in college website or something?
Yes, ma'am.
Will the session are these invited lectures in your college? Are they being recorded and kept in the college website?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Live streaming of YouTube live streaming hocche. So it's recorded.
Ma'am, our technical team will of course track. Okay.
Okay, so let's start.
Shall we begin, Bidhanda?
We should begin, I think. Okay, so good morning, respected principal sir, honorable invited speaker, my beloved students, and everyone present here. So on behalf of the department, I welcome Dr. Jinia Mitro ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation. We are glad that you are present with us. During this pandemic crisis, for the benefits of third semester and fifth semester students, we have taken this initiative. We have arranged special e-lecture series, and today is the grand opening. And this initiative couldn't have been possible without the wholehearted contribution of our principal, sir, and he always inspire and guide our efforts. We are very lucky to have him as our principal. So I would like to invite Dr. Mrinalkanti Chattopadhyay, our principal, sir, to say a few words. Apni kichu bolun. I think technical.
He has left probably.
Okay. So what should we do? Should we wait for him?
I think we can just make a call to him, no?
কল করতে গেলেই তো আবার আমিও লেফট হয়ে যাব আবার কি আমি লেফট হয়ে গেলে আবার
already spoken to me and we had the brief introduction.
Okay, so we may start then the introduction.
It was a very warm welcome from him.
Okay. So let us move on then. So now I will request my colleague Meenakshi Paul to introduce our speaker and invite her to deliver a lecture. Over to you, Meenakshi.
Thank you so much. A very good morning to everybody who has joined us for this special lecture today. First of all, I would like to thank Principal Sir because this lecture would not have been possible without his support. He has constantly been supporting us for arranging such lecture series, programs and webinars. So really, I would also like to echo my colleague, Professor Vidhan Mondal, that we are really very lucky to have him as a principal of the college. Really, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I find immense pleasure to introduce to you all the speaker of the day, Dr. Jinia Mitro. I would like to extend my warm regards on behalf of our college, Kandra Radhakanta Kundu Mahavidyalaya. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
So, without much delaying, let us now move on to the next and the main part of today's session. Before that, I would like to quickly introduce Dr. Mitro to all of you. Dr. Jinia Mitro is Assistant Professor in the Department of English, University of North Bengal. She has a teaching experience of about 18 years, actually more than 18 years. Her research interests are Indian literature in English, feminism, and gender studies. Her research papers were all published in reputed national and international journals. Dr. Mitro has several books to her credit. The Concept of Motherhood in India Meets Theories and Reality, published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing, and Poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, Imagery and Experimental Identity are few of them. Dr. Mitro has also undertaken certain research projects like fourth wave feminism, social media activism. Now, let me familiarize you all about today's topic a little bit, then I will hand it over to ma'am. We all know that feminism is not an unfamiliar term to any one of us. But feminism had gone a long way from what we meant by it decades ago. It has gone beyond the demands for equal political rights and economic independence. Patriarchy has invaded not only the socio-political voice of women, but has also invaded the space of psychological freedom of women. The modern women writers have very well voiced this. One such pertinent name among them is Sylvia Plath. Today, Dr. Mitro will be delivering her talk in this regard. The title of her talk is They Thought Death Was Worth It, But Have a Self to Recover, a Queen, Poetry and Sylvia Plath. So now, I would like to request ma'am to please begin the lecture. But before that, I would request all the listeners that you are all requested to drop your questions, queries, and comments in the comment section box, please. After the lecture will be over, I'll take the questions one by one, and I look forward to a very interactive session, all of you. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am, please.
Thank you, Meenakshi, for this generous introduction. I thank Kandra Radhakanta Kundu Mahavidyalaya for inviting me to speak as a resource person in their invited lecture series. I thank the principal who welcomed me in the beginning, Dr. Mrinal Kanti Chattopadhyay. Thank you, Meenakshi, for contacting me. Thank you, Vidhan Mondal and other faculty members of Department of English. It will be nice to reflect on Sylvia Plath again, a poet who has made her place so close to our hearts. It would be nice to meet you in person as principal welcomed me, invited me, but I guess we must get used to this new normal, at least for some time. They thought death was worth it, but I have a self to recover, a queen. My presentation is titled Sylvia Plath and Poetry. I will begin with Lady Lazarus, which is in one sense Sylvia Plath's signature poem, like Daddy. I will read out a portion from it. Dying is an art like everything else. I do it exceptionally well. I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. I guess you could say I have a call. It's easy enough to do it in a cell. It's easy enough to do it and stay put. It's the theatrical comeback in broad day. To the same place, the same face, the same brute amused shout, a miracle that knocks me out. There is a charge. For the eyeing of my scars, there is a charge. For the hearing of my heart, it really goes. And there is a charge, a very large charge, for a word or a touch or a bit of blood or a piece of my hair or my clothes. So her doctor, so her enemy. I am your opus. I am your valuable, the pure-boned baby that melts to a shriek. I turn and burn. I do not think I underestimate your great concern. Ash, ash, you poke and stir. Flesh, bone, there is nothing there. A cake of soap, a wedding ring, a gold filling. Her God, her Lucifer, beware, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air. It is a bitter, dramatic irony. As we've seen, it dwells on themes of death and oppression. This was published in 1965, 2 years after Sylvia Plath's death by suicide. The poem gives hints to multiple suicide attempts by the tormented poet. We can identify the voice of the narrator with Sylvia Plath herself. It also highlights the role of the power and oppression in one's life. The poem also expresses the ideas of not giving up and resurrection. She compares her suffering to Nazi prisoners to make the readers understand the reason for her discontent. As the poem progresses, she provides graphic details of physical and mental effects of suicide. She lashes out on her doctor and those who take her as an object of entertainment. Her is served in German. She concludes by calling herself a phoenix, rising out of the ashes, as we've seen. Sylvia Plath, the American novelist and poet, met and married British poet Ted Hughes while studying at university's Newnham College, although the two later split. After Hughes left her for Asia Weville in 1962, Plath had fallen into a deep depression. Struggling with her mental illness, she wrote Bell Jar, which was published in 1963, her only novel. based on her life. It deals with a young woman's mental breakdown. Plath published the novel under the pseudonym Victoria Lucas. She also created poems that would make up the collection Arian, which was released after her death in 1965. In a sense, she did rise from the ashes. Sylvia became the first person to win the Pulitzer Prize posthumously. Hughes became a literary executor after her death. While there has been some speculation about how he handled her papers and her image, he did edit what is now considered as her greatest work, Ariel. It features several of her most well-known poems, including Daddy, Lady Lazarus, poems like Years. He continued to produce new collection of Platt's work. Platt won the Pulitzer Prize in 1982 for collected poems. She is a much-studied poet to this day. Sylvia was born on October 27, 1932 in Boston, Massachusetts. We will quickly move to London, February 11, 1963. That was Sylvia Plath's last day of life. She was only 30 years old. With no detailed accounts of her final hours, Ted Hughes was not there. Her two children were too young and asleep. It was reconstructed from the evidences. It was a very cold winter in London, the coldest winter in 150 years. Early in the morning, Platt took care to make preparations for her children, kept bread and milk beside their cribs. She left a note for nurse saying, "Call Dr. Hoyter." She opened the oven and put her head inside the oven. She died of asphyxiation in the London flat where William Butler Yeats had once lived. She opened the window and sealed off the kitchen door with tape and wet towels so that the lentiferous carbon monoxide could not leak out. Her last mothering acts are heartbreaking. Whenever I talk of this, I am reminded of her diary note that are now unabridged journals and claims to be the exact and complete transcription of the diaries Platt kept, edited by Ted Hughes. The note which says, I will read out, "I don't want to use higher education as an escape from responsibilities, but I feel there is so much more awareness I should have before plunging into the field of battle." It is easy to blame Ted Hughes for the suicide of Sylvia Plath. He left her for another woman, and also because of the fact that Ted Hughes' mistress, Asha Weevil, committed suicide 6 years later, just as Plath had done, by putting her head in an oven, turning on the gas, killing herself and their 4-year-old daughter, Alexandra, nicknamed Shura, underlines his guilt. Asha Weevil too suffered from anxiety and suspicion. She managed Ted Hughes' household for him after Sylvia Plath, took care of Plath's babies. She felt eclipsed by Sylvia Plath. She used to write poems too. But it is important to note that Sylvia Plath suffered from chronic clinical depression. Depression ran in their family. Her son Nicholas, who was a fisheries biologist, also committed suicide out of depression when he was 47. When Sylvia was 8 years old, Otto Platt, her father, died, who remains a fixation for Sylvia, as we will see. It is known that he had developed gangrene in one foot after minor trauma and had untreated diabetes mellitus. It transpired that he had neglected his condition because of a conviction that it was cancer. The leg was finally amputated, but he died of pulmonary embolism. The circumstances of his illness and death are strongly suggestive of depression, though neither of Sylvia's parents have any recorded psychiatric history. Plath was a very bright student with an IQ of 160. That's very high, only a little less than Hypatia and Marie Curie, She published her first poem when she was 8. Hear the crickets chirping in the dewy grass, bright little fireflies twinkle as they pass. We can't think of such rich vocabulary at 8. At least I cannot. She entered and won many literary contests while in high school. Sylvia Plath sold her first poem to the Christian Science Monitor and her first short story to 17 magazine. She entered Smith College on a scholarship in 1951 and was a co-winner of the Mademoiselle magazine fiction contest in 1952. A woman of multiple talents and great drive, Sylvia graduated summa cum laude from Smith College, won a Fulbright to study at Cambridge University. I will discuss three main points that stand out in everything written by Sylvia Plath that throws light on her personality and helps us understand her better. To begin with, there is this clinical depression. There was a constant conflict between the luminous, the cheerful, the high achievement persona whose thoughts of success and social status and domestic ideas are conveyed in the letter to her mother, and the dark sense of isolation and inner emptiness that finds expression in journals and poems. No matter how enthusiastic you are, she wrote to a young student, nothing is real, past or future, when you are alone in your room. The first overt expression of depression happened at the age of 20. It was associated with overwork and failure to get into a Harvard writing class on which she had set her heart. She inflicted gashes on her legs and talked of suicide. Bell Jar is regarded as a room in a cliff because the protagonist's descent into mental illness parallels Platt's own experiences of clinical depression or bipolar disorder. To a person in Bell Jar, blank and stopped as dead baby, the world itself is a bad dream, she wrote. There was this emotional instability, which Sylvia called ricochets, and others saw as mood swings, extreme mood swings. Academic or professional success stimulated her into turbinate activity, but even small failure plunged her into deep sense of dejection. The same mercurial quality affected all her personal relationships. She dropped men who were warm to her quite abruptly, so abruptly that it left them puzzled. With women friends also, she would change swiftly from reliance to extreme dependence to hostility if once they disappointed her. She who adored her husband, there are many entries actually on tattoos in her journal, down to what he wore, mentions that he is in the other room, that he is better than any other teacher, even feels somehow that huge, sad hole I feel in having no father. As soon as she suspected him of infidelity, she tore into pieces in jealous rage all his working papers and his treasured edition of Shakespeare, important papers. She was desperate to save their marriage, but the same sweltering fury undermined her efforts at reconciliation. Though she was over-controlled for most of the time, she would impulsively expose herself at times to physical harm, gashing her legs to see if I have the guts, skiing recklessly, breaking her leg, driving the car off-road, actions that normal women would not dare. For instance, she has a poem on cut. She writes, "What a thrill! My thumb instead of an onion, the top quite gone, except for a short hinge." And this is a thrill for her. In getting there, for instance, there is mud on my feet, thick red slipping. The metaphors she uses, death and blood and shadows and black, itself can make an interesting session, the language of depression in Sylvia Plath. For those interested, may look up Sophia Demjen's Sylvia Plath and the Language of Affective States, Written Discourse and Experience of Depression, published by Bloomsbury. Now, my second point is Sylvia's work and career demonstrate the toll feminine mystic often took on ambitious women of the era. Feminine Mystic is a book published in 1964. It is a book by Betty Friedan. And actually, that had an important role in sparkling the beginning of second wave feminism in the United States. The phrase feminine mistake was introduced by Friedan to show the assumptions that women had, that they had to be quite perfect in their household chores, marriage. They had this idea that they have to be perfect in everything, in household chores, marriage, sexual lives, children, mothering children. Plath writes, I can't be satisfied with the colossal job of merely living. She writes, oh no, I must order my life in sonnets, sestinas, and provide a verbal reflector for my 60-watt lighted head. She writes, I'd love to cook, make a house, surge force into a man's dream. Look how she's conditioned. And writes, she continues, if he could talk and work and walk and passionately want to do his career. In the diary entries, we find that she was looking for a man, for a household that is, so typical of this pre-second wave feminist movement women, if you can say that. Also, in journal entries, we get the impression of a mind nurtured by American culture. When you read the journals, you'll find that there are entries on men, concerns about success. Writing is an obsession, but there are no passages on, say, on inquiry on time, or this illusion of moving forward, or say, how best can we live for others? How can we help others? Or questions about fate or free will. For a student of literature, students who read texts like Oedipus, Iliad, and other texts, poems, one expects these questions to come up. It may be because she was too young, or maybe because these diaries that became unabridged journals are diary entries, all right, but nevertheless edited. I will read out from her journal. She writes, so much of self-love, I carry it with me like a dear cancerous relative, to be disposed of only when desperation sets in. Now for jealousy, I can loop out of that one easily by establishing some field my mate cannot participate actively in, but can only stand back and admire. So this is something we will never dream of doing. She continues, I continue reading. That is where writing comes in. It is as necessary for survival of my haughty sanity as bread is to my flesh. I pay the penalty of the educated, emancipated woman. For all her good poetry, we find a mind which is very, very self-centered. But at the same time, it is, marvelously self-reflective and introspective. Flourish. However, the efforts of simultaneously supporting his career, typing his manuscripts, and advancing her own, and raising two small children single-handedly, as mothers are supposed to do, took a toll on her physical and mental well-being. After Hughes left her, she was unable to survive the cold, lonely winter. The conflict she experienced between the domestic and poetic roles is poignant in Stings, one of the series of late poems of Platt that uses bees and beekeeping as metaphoric structure. Her father was, as we know, Otto Emil Platt. He was a professor of biology at Boston University who wrote extensively on bees. He wrote Bumblebees and Their Ways. I will read out a portion from the Stings so that it will be easy for us to catch up. I stand in a column of winged, unmiraculous woman. Honey drudges, I am no drudge. Though for years I have eaten dust and dried plates with my dense hair, and seen my strangeness evaporate blue dew from dangerous skin, will they hate me, these women who only scurry, whose news is the open cherry, the open clover? They thought death was worth it, but I have a self to recover, a queen. Is she dead? Is she sleeping? Where has she been? with her lion red body, her wings of glass. Now she's flying, more terrible than she ever was. Red scar in the sky, red comet over the engine that killed her. The mausoleum, the wax house. So we see that lacking in any sense of female solidarity, the speaker triumphs in the end as a singular exception, the queen who has escaped the domestic entombment, the wax house, through poetry, a death that might be only figurative for the poet, the queen bee, but in Platt's case, it proved to be literal. Her biographer, Edward Butcher, called Platt a confessional poet who was consciously dedicated to fusing biography with poetry to create an enduring legend. The other women poets famous for developing confessional writing is Anne Sexton, who focused even more explicitly on her own bouts with madness and on female body and sexual desire. Although her achievements, for instance, in the bold revisions of fairy tales presented in Transformations, which was published in 1971, are quite distinct from Plath's. But in a sense, her suicide in 1978 meant that their lives provided a similar example of cost of creative ambition of women who were supposed to keep only home and hearth. The examples were disheartening to young aspiring writers. Fortunately, the rise of women's movement in the 1960s and 70s with the second wave of feminism fostered models of female poetic achievements. We have writers like Maya Angelou, Maxine Cumin, Denis Levertov, Audre Lorde, Adrienne Rich, Muriel Rukeyser. Sylvia Plath's work was groundbreaking because she poured so much of herself into it. Now, the third point that I want to make is Sylvia Plath, the deeply troubled poet that she was, left a remarkable influence through her craftsmanship, or should I say, craftswomanship, her handling of metaphors, rhymes, internal rhymes, her colors, the sensuous images, repetitions, her handling of poetry as a whole. Her early poems display a lack of brilliant metaphors. Insufficiency of adulthood push her efforts into larger fusions, the forging of manner and matter in her early poems. In 1959, Plath wrote The Colossus, a painstaking evaluation of her deceased father, the speaker's reconstructions, or we may say, her failure to recreate the man she knew only from childhood memories. The astonishing, controlling image of a fallen giant places the speaker in a serio-comic role of a Lilliputian who climbs ladders and traverses the oversized brow and page of fallen Gulliver. Locked in the hell of ambivalence, she explores fantasies meant to free her from loss, betrayal, and remorse. There are allusions to Orestes and Electra, who destroy themselves by attempting to avenge the father's murder. A pivotal image, married to shadow, carries a hint of an Electra complex. Although the Colossus, the poem primarily concerns with poet's obsession with a long-dead father, her love, which is mostly her hate, her desire that is mostly her death wish, the Colossus also assigns the chore of her poetry, cleaning up pieces and bits and fragments and debris to make something more immaculate, superhuman, and whole. Ariel tells Plath's attempt to reconcile the guilty moral history of her own humanity with some pure, immortal, perpetual movement. It is a look into her mirror for a brutally honest gaze. She discovers irrational love, hate for her father. Her poem Daddy and several others explore her conflicted relationship with her father. Her poems also register her resentment for her husband Ted Hughes and her children Frida and Nicholas, anger at her enforced role as woman. A living doll everywhere you look. It can sew, it can cook, it can talk, talk, talk. There is this mockery in applicants. A posthumous work, black bearing, retreats from anguish to pastoral setting, where the speaker gathers and eats ripe berries, which is the controlling metaphor for art, poised, and constraints which are depicted as thorns. The housewife image links to the taste of salt, an allusion to the poet's hatred of domestication. After achieving the final push to the sea, the speaker looks out on space, a metaphor for purity of death. The sound of sea reminds her of hammerings against her stubbornness. During the last 3 years, we find Platt abandoned the restraints and conventions and that had bound her much of her early poetry. She wrote with great speed, producing poems of stark revelations and confession. The anxiety, confusion, doubt that haunted her were transmuted into verses of great power and pathos. Before her death, there was a burst of productivity. In the last years, Plath could push the interdependence of imagination and reality to its extreme. She had attained at last the long sought stasis in darkness within herself as her life and work merged, became interchangeable and indistinguishable. I will read out a bit from Ariel. And now I foam to wait, a glitter of seas, the child's cry melts in the wall, and I am the arrow. The dew that flies, suicidal, at one will drive into the red, I, the cauldron of the morning. I understand it is not possible to, judge a poet or do a poet in such a short time. A mind like hers, with all its complexity. We have only the tip of the iceberg. But I will end by saying that Sylvia Plath had finally achieved what she desired most. The journal ends in the fall of 1962, just after the end of marriage. Plath came to write her great work, the poems of Ariel. They were written in a flood of incandescent energy, 30 poems in 1 month. The first drafts came pouring out, but she walked over each one carefully later. No one else had seen these poems, but she knew with great certainty that she had made the leap. As she wrote to her mother on October 16, 1962, in the middle of her extraordinary month, I am a genius of a writer. I have it in me. I am writing the best poems of my life. They will make my name. So, in the end, she had indeed made that leap. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a really enlightening and enriching experience. And I was really mesmerized by that rhythmic charm of your voice and the way you read out the poems. Really, thank you so much. We can actually see that you have taken up a serious issue which is really important even in the contemporary times, and that is of the clinical depression, of the theme of mental health, which was even emphasized in the poems of Sylvia Plath, and how she had given an account of the way in which women tried to struggle with it and try to cope up with it. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. So now we have seen that a lot of questions are there. So if you permit me, I would like to take up the questions, ma'am.
Yes, sure.
Okay. So first question that has been asked by one of our students is, why did Sylvia Plath commit suicide?
Well, as I already said, if she was listening, is that Sylvia Plath right after her marriage, she had this idea, this rosy idea of marriage, and she was very much in love with Ted Hughes. As we can find from her journal entries, she was deeply in love with him, and she had this expectation that both her life and her domestic life and her life as a writer will flourish after marriage. But Ted Hughes, we see, left her for Ashia Wevel, and when she left her, Hughes left her for Wevel, he was having a relationship with this lady, and plus there were other factors like it was a very cold winter. Like I said, it was the coldest winter in London in 150 years. Then she had this burden of bringing up her children single-handed without the support of Ted Hughes or anybody else for that matter. So these were all precipitating factors. And she was already a patient of chronic mental disorder and patient of bipolars too. So all these resulted in, taking her, made her take this drastic step of ending her life. Yes. Hello.
Hello. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah. So the next question that we have here is, why does Sylvia Plath compare her father with Hitler?
Well, because we know Sylvia Plath had come to know that her father had, sympathies for Nazis, and it was later found, and that is something was very shocking for Plath, I guess. That is probably the reason why she compares her father with Nazi.
Okay, ma'am. We have this really interesting question, ma'am.
Yes.
Sylvia, one of the students wants to know Sylvia Plath's impact on Indian English feminist writing.
Okay, Indian English feminist writing. We can actually, I would say that if you talk of feminism and Sylvia Plath, for instance, if you take poems like Lady Lazarus, which is often celebrated as iconic for Plath, it is, we can say that it advocated feminism. Unlike other modern feminist poets, the sincere approach to patriarchy, with their sincere approach to patriarchy, I mean, Plath's feminism evolves from her protagonists' deep-rooted hatred for their male counterparts. Her father's death, which she saw as betrayal, her husband's betrayal, this hysterical hatred and antagonism of Plath's narrator in the poem Lady Lazarus, for instance, puts to question Plath's feminist authority. The female self that says, I eat men like air, is also kind of self-destructive and not very desirable. Yet, when we look at the confessional mode and the techniques of a woman's self-conjuration, reveal Plath's modernist trends in modern feminist discourse to portray a woman's self-perception, of her position in male-dominated society. The narrator in the poem, Lady Lazarus, for instance, should not be misunderstood as representing, Plath's feminism. But there are seeds, of course. In many poems, there are seeds of this feminism. There are other poems also. I think it remains in every woman poet. Women, when they write poetry, somewhere they carry the seed of feminism, all that they experience around them. It flows through their, pen. Indeed, Lady Lazarus can be deemed as Plath's effort to voice modern women's nascent self through self-confession. And when we talk of this confessional poetry, we find that, of course, there are confessional poets in India, like we have Kamala Das and other poets writing in confessional mode. So it must be, poets, they influence each other. Those who have read Sylvia Plath and the kind of putting herself completely into poetry, must have affected, influenced many of our confessional poets.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. But I would actually like to add one point here, ma'am, that the kind of frustration that women in South Asia, they face compared to the women of the first world.
Yeah.
Don't you think that there is probably a difference in that can create some kind of differences in their experiences and in their writing when we compare Kamala Das, especially with Sylvia Plath?
Pardon? Difference in writing.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. The tradition of confessional writing in India will be, of course, a little different from the kind, if you say, from the kind of poetry that Sylvia Plath has been writing, because their experiences itself is different. As we say that, the kind of experience white women of first world have is absolutely different from the kind of experience the South Asian women in India or other women have. But we can understand the influences of Robert Lowell or John Berry or Snodgrass, for instance, Rohit K, Annie Sexton, and also Sylvia Plath, partially, on Kamala Das. The kind of revolutionary voice she speaks of, the kind of erotic and erotic images that she talks of, the way the treatment of sexual love and human body, the way she speaks of human body. Of course, there is a direct or indirect influence on Kamala Das. Although the writing will be not exactly this, you cannot expect, the poets writing from two different places with two different experiences, different, born in different environment, carrying different minds, writing the similar poems. But of course, as women, the women experience connects Kamala Das with Sylvia Plath, but the experiences as she was an Indian and she was from London, Massachusetts, born in Massachusetts. So the experiences will be different, vastly different.
Okay, ma'am. The next question that we have is, in what way we can say that Sylvia Plath's poem are elegies? I mean, elegic in nature.
Well, not all poems are elegiac in nature, but poems like Daddy, if you say, or in some poems she talks of, do you mean she talks of dying? For instance, Daddy is I think it's in your syllabus as well. Daddy is a very controversial and highly anthologized poem. It was published a month after Sylvia Plath's separation from her husband, 4 months before her death. It is a deeply complex poem informed by poet's relationship with her deceased father, Otto Platt, told from a perspective of a woman addressing her father. The memory of whom has an oppressive power over her. The poem details the speaker's struggle to break free of his influence. There are many images of death and dying. Of course, there is this note, but then, yes, some of her poems talk about death and dying, and especially the colors she uses and the kind of breaking free she's trying to in the poem.
Okay, ma'am. We have a very interesting question here.
Yeah.
Plath presents her husband as a torturer. So why her husband published her writings after her death? Is it only for the sake of publishing?
Well, this is a very personal kind of question, I see, because, I don't think Ted Hughes published the poems only for the sake of publishing. He was also, there was this, they were in love, and this love was, of course, mutual. And Ted Hughes, when these journals, the portion I read out from the end of the journal, it says that she had made her leap. This is actually not an entry by Sylvia Plath. The portion that I read out in the end of my presentation is actually inserted by Ted Hughes. So it is a quotation from a letter that Plath had written to her mother. So and he makes it a point to say that nobody had seen the poems. Nobody had seen these poems that she composed, Ariel. He meant that even he did not see the poems which were composed. And when he saw the poems, when he read the poems, there was this sheer quality of poetry that makes him understand that she had made the leap, that probably made him publish the poems. And also, he had become her literary executor after her death. He published the journals. He published many of Sylvia Plath's poems, partially probably because he was in love with Sylvia Plath, and he understood that she had ended her life, which was pathetic, because of the quality of the poems that were very good poems.
Can we say that as a poet, probably Ted Hughes respected Sylvia Plath a lot?
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, maybe we can't say anything about the personal relationship, but as a poet, he might have respected her.
Yes, Ted Hughes Plath to write poems. There is a poem on church that Ted Hughes had asked Sylvia Plath to write, and Sylvia had written the poem. And after she had written the poem, she had shown it to Ted Hughes, and they would mutually read each other's poems, talk about improving on poems, talk about editing, and Sylvia Plath would be very happy if the poem was kind of appreciated by Ted Hughes. And there is this special mention of the poem on church that she had written because of Ted Hughes's request. And she used to type Ted Hughes's manuscripts. She used to send them. And when the rejections came, she was really disheartened that how come Ted Hughes's poems are rejected, or when they were accepted, she was overtly happy. So they had this compatibility with each other as poet.
For sure, that actually provides us a different way to their relationship. The next question that we have, ma'am, how does the concept of purity is manifested in Plath's poetry? The concept of purity.
Concept of purity. Well, towards the end of her poems, like Ariel, I told you, she is trying to, and also in the other poems, of course, let me talk about Ariel, the concept of purity. She is talking about a stasis in darkness, where she achieves in Ariel. God's lioness, how one we grow, pivot of heels and knees, the furrow splits and passes. She is talking about hauls me through air, thighs, hair, flakes from heels, white Godiva, I unpeel, dead hands, dead stringencies. And now I, foam to white, a glitter of seas, the child's cry melts in the wall, and I am the arrow, the dew that flies, suicidal in one, with the drive into the red, I, the cauldron of the morning. There is this, asking for, this reaching for something else, this reaching beyond, reaching towards the otherness. That is there very much in her poetry.
Okay, ma'am. We have another very interesting question here. What do metaphors and child suggest about the view on pregnancy and motherhood?
I didn't get that metaphor of.
The metaphor of child, probably. One of the students is asking about the metaphor of child and her views on pregnancy, Platt's view about pregnancy and motherhood.
Well, Plath's view about pregnancy. So Sylvia Plath was, she wasn't very interested in domestic kind of work. She used to work, of course, but she tried this fine balance between her domestic life and taking care of her children. She was trying hard to do that. And she was left alone. That was, of course, there. And, motherhood was something that she did not quite enjoy, I might say. Like especially maybe because she was left alone with all the kind of duties of motherhood. She did not very much enjoy this motherhood. And domestic images of joy and comfort and caring about children. Of course, we have these images in her poems. Many of these images are there, especially in her journals. But especially if you talk about child, and if you talk about her being very happy being a mother, or very happy enjoying her motherhood, there is no such kind of domestic bliss of motherhood explained or expressed in her poems.
Okay, ma'am. There is one last question that I would like to take up here. One of the students wants to know Platt's depth to any Sexton. I mean, the impact of any Sexton that Platt had, or what?
Okay. Annie Sexton, we know that she was also a confessional poet. She used to also write in the confessional mood, and she also wrote about the same kind of poetry. And of course, the relation between them is anybody reading Platt will think about Annie Sexton, and they are because of their achievement and the kind of end both of them come to. But then Annie Sexton was writing confessional mood, and we have Platt's this bitterness. Platt's repetition, for instance, where she says, I am myself. This kind of bitterness is there in Annie Sexton. Of course, some of it is there, but in Annie Sexton's, for instance, if you talk about the transformations that she writes, that she publishes, where she talks about this fairy tales. When she focuses on fairy tales, she represents revisions of fairy tales. They are very distinct from Platt in a sense, but because Annie Sexton was also writing in the confessional mode, and Platt was also writing in the confessional modes, it's very easy to connect them. Anybody who has read Annie Sexton and who has read Platt will connect these two, especially because both of them were, focusing on the bouts of madness, on things like female body and sexual desire, and especially because both of them had similar ending. But in a sense, Annie Sexton is not quite Platt. Her poems are, especially when I was talking about these transformations, which are revisions, bold revisions of fairy tales, I must say. they are quite distinct from Platt's. So there was this, of course, there was this confessional mood coming up, this writing, and of course there is no clear, um, confession in her journal that she has read Annie Sexton and she is being influenced. She was influenced by Annie Sexton. The way she writes about Virginia Woolf, for instance, she says, "I bought this," and she was so elated to buy Virginia Woolf. And she makes she notes that Virginia Woolf makes my world possible in one place. So there was this overt, enthusiasm about reading Virginia Woolf, but I do not think there is any such kind of overt happiness about buying or reading Annie Sexton's book. She was writing. Annie Sexton published The Transformations of Prose in 1971. That was much later.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. We are really.
Well, I have a question, if I'm allowed.
Yes.
Meenakshi.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
That's not,
Go
that's
ahead.
not,
No. Go ahead.
You are free to
that's not a question, ma'am. Actually, I've really enjoyed your lecture. That's very
Thank you.
enlightening and enriching, ma'am. I have a query. Actually, I teach daddy to them, actually.
Okay.
That's my assignment.
Yes.
So sometimes I myself feel very puzzled to analyze certain lines. For example, there is a line, every woman adores a fascist, the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. So what does she want to suggest here? What does she want to indicate here as a woman? So what does she try to suggest here, that a woman adores a fascist? That means she is adoring her husband and she is also adoring her father as a fascist.
Yes.
So she is trying to justify their action? Or is this she critiquing the women, the contemporary women of her time who love a fascist?
Well, Sylvia Plath had a very complex kind of mind. She compares herself to a food inside a black shoe. For 30 years, she says she has lived this way, deprived of color and not having the courage to breathe or sneeze. And then she wants to, move out of the influence. She addresses her father, informs him that she has to kill him. Though she then says that he actually died before she had the chance to do that. And she describes her father as being heavy as marble, like a bag full of God, as well as a horrifying statue with one toe that looks like a San Francisco seal, huge and gray. And not God, but swastika. Yeah, the Nazi comment comes in. Here she says, "Daddy, I have to kill you. You died before I had time. Marble heavy, the bag full of God, ghastly statue with one grey toe, big as a fresco seal." Yes, and yes, she's talking about power and she's talking about this oppression. You do not know any more black shoe in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe or a chew. So she cannot breathe, she cannot sneeze. She has been living in this shoe. In that connection, she is talking about her father as a Nazi, as a fascist who has been, oppressing her. And because she never felt, although her father died, she never grew out of, her fixation for her father. And she tries to do that many times in her poems. You will see that she tries to, grow out of her influence of her father fixation. And her love for father is also a kind of hate. It is a complex love-hate relationship, isn't it? That she feels for her father.
Yeah, that makes her ambivalent and paradoxical while writing this poem.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And another thing, in the last stanza, she has written that, and the villagers never liked you.
Yes,
So,
yes.
is this any autobiographical? Is there any autobiographical significance to that? Is this just only for the sake of the poem, or her father was not liked by the neighbors of villagers? Is there any reality?
Actually, here I think her personal love-hate comes out, and as well as the Nazi reference also comes in, because the speaker continues, describing the German language, saying that it is like the train engine carrying her off like a Jew to a concentration camp. She began speaking like a Jew, and then started thinking that she might, in fact, be a Jew. In the end, of course, there is this. I think she talks about a sharp wooden post, a kind used to kill vampires.
Yes, the stake.
Yes, the stuck to her father's heart. And the speaker imagines that the village and the locals never liked her father. And so they were dancing and stomping on the body because they knew what he was.
It's a kind of, it seems that there was a kind of carnivalesque celebration after the death of her father.
Yes. One reference can be that the Nazi reference. Another can be that she is, trying to break free of the fixation that she had of her father. And when her father is dead, and in this poem, basically, she tries to climb out of, she tries to, come to terms.
She's trying to move out.
Move out of this influence that has kept her, for 30 years inside the boot.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidhan.
So that's quite a wonderful session. I would like to request if there are any other questions, then I'll take up them.
All the students for listening to me and putting questions.
Okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I am really tempted to ask a few questions also, because I don't know that whether I'll get the opportunity again or not. So I don't want to ask this question. In Platt's poem, we can see that there is a kind of conflict between a woman's desire for a happy domestic life and at the same time her urge for a successful professional career. As you have pointed out, the penalty of being an educated woman. So and we somewhere in the contemporary times we all suffer from that, and we try to cope up between these two tendencies. But ultimately, I want to ask that through her poems or through her writing or through her engagement in the professional sphere, was she able to overcome that conflict? Because ultimately she committed suicide.
Yeah, actually, if you look back at Platt's, the time she lived and the time she was writing, it coincided, if you talk of feminism, it coincided with the era of baby boom generation. When if you watch Netflix series, you will see these desperate housewives and the other kind of series that speak of typically women living in suburbs and having a lot of children, doing a lot of household work. This is the typical of this baby boom generation. And Platt, distinctly, she was kind of standalone, the reluctant bride, the reluctant mother, and who instead, proved to have an unwavering commitment to writing. She wanted to write, and she wanted, of course, she was before this. I was talking about this pre-second wave feminism, and where she had this idea. She was conditioned to have, a husband, a proper house, domestic life. And but then the reality of it was not a very happy thing for Plath, because she had to do that single-handedly without much help from Ted Hughes, as we can guess. Of course, it's only a guesswork, because there are no entries like of Ted Hughes holding children or feeding children. If he had done so, Plath would be elated and would have written in her diary. So Plath wrote before, women traditionally had jobs, and was, one of the first, we can say, voices to address this conflict between this domestic and personal balance. She was conditioned on one side to have a good domestic life. There are a lot of entries in her journal, to have a house, to have, men. I would like, I think I referred to a part from the journal where she says to have a house, to have a man talking, to have his career. She doesn't speak about her career. She's talking about his career, a man having a career, and she fulfilling the house. She talks about these things. So she was conditioned on one sense to have this house. And also we see in her attempts to, see this marriage, in her desperate attempts. So had she been in this postmodern age, had she been now, if Plath was alive now, I don't think she would have made such a great effort to save her marriage. Or, of course, that depends. That's her personal love was involved. But then, women also can now think of moving out of marriages which do not work. But during Plath's time, when mental treatment was also not so developed, she was suffering from this chronic depression. At the same time, she was one to, I think she was the first one to address this conflict between domestic and this professional balance. She frequently explores what it means to be woman in terms of the traditional conflict between family and career. And she was so much into writing. If you read her journals, you will see that there are so many entries on writing, that she was kind of obsessed about writing. She writes about a short story, she writes the plot of the short story, and then, of course, Bell Jar is there in brief, that all that she wants to write. So she was experiencing this social convention of the 50s. And she was in a society in which marriage and childbearing had to be there. But at the same time, she herself, if we look at herself, Plath's personality, she wants to be a writer. So it must have been a very difficult thing to, balance both these duties. And especially in the unconventional role that she cast herself into. That was her inner call. But at the same time, she had this subjugation, she had this negation, she had this problem with Ted Hughes and her father, the image of her father. Yes, that was a very interesting question, Meenakshi. Yes.
But finally, ultimately, at the as a final word of the day, we all would like to know that what is the way out? What is the way out of this dilemma? Personally, ma'am, I would like to know.
Well, do you write poetry too?
Of course, of course.
That's very good. So I think the only way out of this, one of the ways out of this, is to achieve a fine balance, probably, because if you neglect, or if you move out of domesticity and childbearing, I do not know. Of course, it's a preference. Now, society has moved to such a point where it's not necessary for women to marry. If you look at the Victorian novels, you will see that women, they were looking for a husband because they wanted to sustain themselves. They had no power. Their property would go to the hands of sons in the family, and the women would not get any share of the property. So they were all on the lookout of having husbands who were well off. and so that they could sustain themselves. So if you look at Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility and other books, you will see that finding a husband was of prime importance. So this was there in women. But now, if we consider the situation the women find themselves in, it is not like it's not social pressure, not necessary, no social pressure any longer to, you have to get married, to marry and to bear children. Women marry out of their free choice, at least many women do. And bearing children is also the rights of bearing children is with the women. They can decide, very well decide to live child-free or to bear children or what they are to do. They have this rights of reproductive rights. So it is on the women, but at the same time we see that the women who did not marry, especially if we refer to the third wave, the women who did not marry, who just, they went for career. And then we have the backlash of the fourth wave. Since, I've been working with this fourth wave feminism. We have writers like Rebecca Walker talking backlashing on their mother, Alice Walker, saying that our mother gave us a career, but, we never had children. They taught us that career was prime importance. They taught us that writing was important, and we never had a domestic life. We never had children. And Rebecca Walker, if you look up on the internet, you will find her writing all about rebel women. There she says that she was very happy to bear children, to do something that her mother never approved of. So in third wave, we see this movement away from domesticity and childbearing. But in the fourth wave, interestingly, some of the women, they are choosing to have children. If you remember the line from Margaret Atwood's poem, I think we did in class, a child is a child, a poem is a poem.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we did it.
A poem cannot be a child, and a child cannot take the place of a poem.
Yeah,
So
I remember.
Yes. So we have this backlash of fourth wave feminist women who are again opting back to have children. So I think it's finally a personal choice, and it all depends on the fine balance. And of course, men should come forward to help the women. It is no longer compartmentalized, gender stereotypes, that it is only the woman who will suffer in the kitchen or work in the kitchen and do the childbearing role, rear the children, because now the concept of mothering has also undergone considerable change. So, and we have no words like fathering. While we talk a lot of mothering or parenting. So these are the words which must be incorporated, and to have a healthy life together, men and women should live as partners and break the gender stereotypes, I can say, so that the women can also, not be so much under oppression and work with fine balance, both men and women, because gender stereotypes, the stereotyping is harmful, we know, both for men and for women as well. So the answer is to, find a fine balance between everything, the domesticity and the work.
Yeah, sure, ma'am, sure. Thank you for ma'am. You have been speaking for a long time, but we have this final question from one of the students, and I don't want to disappoint them. So she wants to know about the Electra complex of Sylvia Plath in response to her father.
Okay. So Sylvia Plath, actually, if you look at the poem, Daddy. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Let me ask this in another way.
Yes.
Actually, her question is like this: that when Plath's father died, he was 8 years old. So, is unresolved Electra complex up in this age, and that is actually enhancing the trauma throughout her life? That is her question.
Actually, yes.
This is actually suggesting that the question of Meenakshi, that is there any way out? There is no way out. The series of conflicts. These are actually troubling us and troubling the minds of students as well.
And also, her, especially if you do Daddy, which is on your syllabus, you will find this Electra complex embedded in the poem.
Yes,
and also Colossus. In Colossus, she speaks of, this. There is this Electra complex coming up, but in Freudian psychology, of course, we will call it Electra complex, the complex of she feels betrayal, the arousal brought about by the impact of her father's death, and the displeasure that drove the patient to pursue mastery over art. We can say that she wanted to communicate, she wanted to understand herself, and it is a very complicated psychological problem, we can say, when you cannot outgrow the influence of your father, and when father is dead, you think of his death as a kind of betrayal. But also I would say that the mental treatment, psychiatric sessions were not as improved then, when Sylvia Plath was so young and when she was alive and writing. And so therefore, of course, she had sessions, but it was not as developed as it is now. So, she consciously tried to go out of her complex, her hatred for her father. It was a love-hatred kind of relationship that she had with her father. Yes.
Okay, so I hope we don't have any more questions now. So we have almost...
Daddy was also, I will just interrupt you, Daddy was also a kind of catharsis of the psychical residue, left back by her trauma. So you can approach Daddy as also a poem that achieves catharsis. And also in the countless poems where she refers to, directly or indirectly, to beekeeping images and to her father. Yes, Meenakshi.
Yes, ma'am. So we have almost reached to the end of today's session, and I think that's quite a session. It's really wonderful, and we feel like continue listening to you. It was really great.
Thank you.
And I believe that today's lecture actually will help us to rise out of the ashes of traditional patriarchy, and we can come up with a new definition of feminism, of gender equality. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I thank all of you for your patient hearing.
Okay. I would like to extend now my extreme gratitude to Dr. Mithru, who has consented to deliver the lecture on our request, despite her busy schedule and multiple academic involvements. Ma'am, we look forward for such enlightening sessions again in future. Thank you, ma'am. I would also like to extend my deep regards to Principal Sir, without whose support these lecture would not have been such a program. At the same time, I would like to thank each and every faculty member of the department. And of course, I would like to specially thank Professor Vidhan Mondal, who not only undertook a vital role in helping me to conduct this particular lecture, but he also motivated me to take a step in this regard. So thank you. And last but not the least, I would like to thank all of my students, because ultimately this lecture is for you, and I'm really happy to see so much of questions coming from the students. So thank you. So thank you to all the students. So
I would like to add the name of another one in this list. Meenakshi, we should also thank Sehwaj
Oh, I'm
Because,
sorry. I'm
yeah,
really sorry.
He's also helping us.
Yeah.
Actually,
I extend my deep regards to the head of the technical team, Shahbaz Da, who actually helped us throughout in all the college programs and webinars. So thank you so much. And please pardon me for forgetting your name. Thank you so much, everyone. So
Thank you, Meenakshi, Bidhan. It was nice.
thank you, ma'am. We will expect you again. And
Thank
we
you
will
very
hope
much.
that in that case, in future, we will have you in our college campus. And that
Yeah,
will be
I'd
great.
love to.
yeah,
I would
exactly.
visit you all. I would love to, but for the time being, we have to get used to this new normal.
Yes.
that we heard. Yes. Thank you, students, for your patient hearing. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
So I would like to end the session here. Thank you so much for all of your patience. Thank you so much.